Gerda Taro was robbed of her praise. Having the unfortunate distinction of being the first female photographer to both photograph the front lines as well as die on them at the age of only 26, she was never allowed the chance to take advantage of the freedom that photography had granted her. Her photos would tell the horrors of war in brutal detail and help to define modern war photography, but the credit would go under a different name. For close to a century, this magnificent photographer had all but vanished from history, with her short life's work being attributed to her partner, himself an enormously celebrated photographer. Even now that her name has been dusted off and brought back into the history books, she is still undoubtedly overshadowed by the man she helped to create. Gerda Taro very well could have been a household name like her partner Robert Capa, but never got the respect she deserved. All because of one unlucky day. Gerda Porholi was born in 1910 to a Jewish family in Stuttgart, Germany. Her family would reside in the town for some time before moving to Leipzig right at the dawn of the Nazi era. Being both Jewish and at this point a leftist thinker, Gerda strongly opposed the ideologies of the regime and made it well known. In 1933, she was arrested and detained for distributing anti-Nazi propaganda, making her and her family targets of the Nazi Party. Her family was forced to flee their home to escape the prosecution from their hate-filled government, her parents fleeing to Palestine and her brothers to England. Gerda would arrive in Paris, where she would never see her family again. Gerda had been invited to a photo shoot. Her friend, also a refugee, had been asked to pose by a charming Hungarian photographer, so charming in fact that she did not trust him, and so Gerda tagged along. There she would meet Andre Friedman, who, like his company, had been displaced from his home and had come to Paris for sanctuary. The two quickly became enamored with each other, becoming lovers as the photographer mentored her on photography. As the two's personal and professional relationship grew, it started to become more and more apparent that if they were to be successful as photographers, something would have to change. Although Gerda had fled her home in an attempt to evade the ignorant beliefs around Jews, the hate towards her had unfortunately followed her to France. Anti-Semitism had been growing throughout Europe, not just in Germany, and made it difficult for both Gerda and Andre to be respected, and so they hatched a plan. They would transform themselves. Friedman would become the American photographer Robert Capa, and Gerda would take the name of her friend and Japanese artist Taro Okamoto, becoming Gerda Taro. At the time, American photographers were far more respected, able to charge far more than a European one, especially one that was Jewish, and so the pair crafted the persona of a daring American photojournalist. They would both photograph under his name, posing as representatives of the fictional documentarian, furthering the myth of the elusive photographer. Much of the early work originally attributed to Capa was in fact taken by Taro, who made use of the facade to escape the gender expectations of the time. Robert Capa once said that if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough, a mantra echoed in Taro's photos. Nowhere else is this more apparent than in her coverage of the war. In 1936, a civil war broke out in Spain, turning the country into an ideological battleground between fascism and socialism. This would serve as the prologue to World War II, with Allied countries backing the left and what would become the Axis powers reinforcing the fascists. All these powers obviously had their own agenda, wanting to support their own ideologies, but Taro herself felt she had her own personal duty. Although their photography was physically close to the action, Capa's famous quote also refers to being close to the subject emotionally. Taro had only grown more politically minded during her time in Paris, and seeing the same mindset that had forced her from her home taking root elsewhere, this time even backed by Germany, nothing was going to stop her from aiding the resistance. During her time on the battlefield, Gerda Taro photographed deeply impactful and personal snapshots of the victories and defeats of the resistance force, her belief in the cause fueling her precariousness. This emotional depiction of war revolutionized war photography. Until then, photojournalism was largely unbiased, existing to document, not to express, but Taro's empathetic showcase of the battlefield would inspire a future of impactful war photography. She would work alongside her partner for a year, capturing the stories and horrors of war in breathtaking detail, but still being miscredited as Capa. This is not to say she was unknown. Taro had fallen in with the international community of anti-fascist artists and intellectuals, a group of like-minded thinkers who were in Spain to create and converse. Her work had turned her into something of an anti-fascist icon, making her depictions even more important, and so when Capa went back to Paris, Taro refused his marriage proposal and stayed in Spain to continue capturing the fight alone. It's during this unfortunately short solo expedition where Taro produced some of her most important work. Most notably, the deeply jarring photos taken of the Valencia hospital after a catastrophic bombing made a name for herself as publications from the world over climbed over each other to acquire these powerful images. She would continue on to the front line in Brunette, where despite the claims of fascist propaganda, the resistance force was still strongly defending the town. It is in this town, however, where she would take her last photograph. Despite the warnings and pleas from her peers, Taro refused to be anywhere but in the thick of the battle, and that is where she was when the fascist army launched a devastating attack on the town of Brunette. The resistance forces were forced to retreat hastily, and in the chaos of the withdrawal, Gerda Taro was crushed against a car by a friendly tank. She was transported to El Goloso English Hospital, where she was treated for her injuries, but would succumb to them only hours later. Gerda Taro's funeral was held in Paris on August 1st, 1937, what would have been her 27th birthday. The French Communist Party organized the mourning to honor their fallen comrade, and was attended by over 10,000, clearly touched by her passion and bravery. Despite the pure adoration for the photographer, her name would be buried from history, covered up by the chaos of larger wars in the shadow of her mentor. For 70 years, the name Gerda Taro had been replaced with that of Robert Capa. That is, until the discovery of the Mexican suitcase. In 2007, a cache of negative photos originally thought to be taken by Capa were handed into the International Center for Photography. The collection had been frantically shuttled out of Paris during the Nazi invasion by a friend of Capa's and had been passed from hand to hand for safekeeping, eventually ending up in the possession of the Mexican ambassador to France. It wasn't until these photos, now in Mexico, were ID'd by the ambassador's nephew that they came back into focus. The notation on these photographs brought to light the sheer amount of work that had been falsely credited, bringing Taro's name back into the zeitgeist, and gave her the spotlight she had long deserved. Gerda Taro has since been honored with countless exhibitions showing her work the world over, as well as joined the chosen few to be honored with a Google Doodle to commemorate her 108th birthday. It's ironic that someone who captured some of the most memorable and captivating images could be so easily lost to time. Always being behind the camera left her on the wrong side of the lens of history. Her resurgence only shows to prove just how impactful she truly was, her passion and bravery able to cut through every attempt to bury her, even in death. The evil she saw in the world definitely tried, even came close to covering up her part in history, but her artistry prevailed. She never lived to see the ultimate force of that evil. If she had been alive to document World War II, we would have seen it, and the rest of the world, through a lens like no other.